Okay, good afternoon, everyone. We're going to do something very unusual. Right now, we're going to start on time. My name is Bob Noonan. I'm the chair of the AFCEA Intelligence Committee. So welcome to what is always a great panel out here. And we're really blessed. We have three really strong leaders in defense intelligence that are going to speak to us today. And I want to start, I'll introduce everybody, and then we'll get right into it. Now, questions, if you as Tish said this morning, if you have questions, put them on a card and get them up here. The way we're going to do this, I will ask some questions to start off, much as you saw Michelle Flournoy did with General Votel. And then as questions come in, we'll ask them. If they don't get answered, we'll try and get an answer to you later. But again, great panel. I want to start off, and I'm going to start since I'm a former Army guy. I'll start with the Army. And I want to start off by welcoming Lieutenant General Scott Berrier. Scott's the current Army G2, the Senior Intelligence Officer of the Army. He's been in that position since January of 18. Scott, as a general officer, has also commanded the Intelligence Center at School at Fort Huachuca, Arizona, and he's also been the Deputy Chief of Staff for Intelligence Security Assistance Forces. These titles for Afghanistan and Iraq go on and on. He's been in Afghanistan and Operations Enduring Freedom and Freedom Central, and he's also been the J2 of CENTCOM and a lot of other assignments, tactical assignments. He started off in Alaska. He's had multiple assignments in Alaska in the 6th Infantry Division. He's been in the Ranger Battalion and Regiment. He's been the 7th ID, the 10th ID, where he commanded a battalion. He's been the 25th ID in Afghanistan and Hawaii. And when he was at the 10th, he was also in Afghanistan. He's also served in Korea. So multiple tactical and operational assignments that have served him well, and he's the current Army G2. The second panelist, Lieutenant General Jamieson, no stranger to the AFCEA INSA crowd. I do want to announce, for those that don't know, she's going to be retiring very shortly, and I think a big round of applause to congratulate her.
Thank you.
Well done. She's had an absolutely great career over there, and has been the leader in just so many of the ISR initiatives we have in defense. She is the Air Force's Senior Intelligence Officer. She's had, again, a lot of great operational and tactical assignments, everything from commanding the 25th Air Force. She's been at Langley, she's been at Nellis, she's commanded a squadron in Ramstein, and she also commanded the Joint Intelligence Center Pacific at PACOM. That's where I first met her, when I was one of those Parkway Patriots. I think that's what they call it, right? It's not Beltway Bandit, it's Parkway Patriot, I think is the right term. She's done Deputy Commanding General down at in Afghanistan, in Kabul. She did that. She's also been the Director of Intelligence Headquarters ACC at Langley, and then in 2016 became the Air Force's Senior Intelligence Officer, and needless to say, has done an amazing amount of work with artificial intelligence, so all AI questions can go to her.
There's a panel next door.
Yeah, there's a panel next door. And finally, but not least, Rear Admiral Steve Parode. Steve is the director of the Warfighting Integration Directorate, N2 N6F, the Office of the Chief of Naval Operations. He is a cryptologist, I believe.
Yes, sir.
And he is a member of the Navy's Information Warfare Community and Space Cadre. Again, another guy with a variety of assignments at sea. He served aboard the USS Wisconsin as the Intelligence Department head and during Operation Desert Storm. He's also spent time with Special Submarine Mission deployments. A lot of work in the CRIPI Resource Coordination Business Force Protection for Commander Cruiser Destroyer Group 8, I believe it is.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. CVN 69 Strike Group, and has been also was involved in Operations Iraq Freedom and the J2C and excuse me, I'm sorry about that. Silence all your phones, all right? And he is now serving, as I said, as the the Warfare Integration Directorate up at N2 and 6. And he's been in that position since July 2018, is that right?
That's right, General.
All right. So those are our three panelists. I will start off with some questions. And again, if please write your questions. But we're very fortunate to have this great group of Americans and great group of soldiers and leaders. All right. So what we're going to do is I'm going to start off with a question.
Would you mind if we did a couple comments? To
Yeah,
open
no,
up
I'm going to
first
lead you
one?
in.
Okay,
Yes.
perfect. Perfect.
She's retiring and she thinks, no, I'm only kidding. She's used to being in charge. So I want to head off I want a chance for opening statements for each of them. And just to say, a lot of things have stayed the same since last year's summit. But as you know, a lot of things have changed. We've got the development implementation, the OD&I strategy. We have an increase in the Iranian threat, activity and rhetoric. North Korean missile testing is increasing, increased tensions in Kashmir, resurgent Taliban attacks in Afghanistan. But on the other hand, we also have now an approved NDAA, which is probably, if you're in the Pentagon, probably the best gift you can get as opposed to a continuing resolution. We're starting out with a new Space Command. We've got a continued high space of cyber ops. We've got changes to the defense and IC leadership. And this year, we're also seeing a great deal of thinking and discussion around this whole concept of multi-domain operations. And each of the services has commented on that in their service industry days, but it'd be interesting to see what they have to say here. So let me start off with, against that backdrop, what is all of this? There's some things that stayed the same, but there are significant changes. So what does this mean to you and your services? What are the challenges and what are the things maybe that are they're staying, that are really different? So let me start off with, I'll start off with General Jamieson.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much for the invite, General Noonan. I appreciate it, and I appreciate the ability to address this esteemed audience. There has been a significant change, but the constant is it just keeps changing. So when I really kind of break down and what I heard the question was, with all of this competition, great power competition going, with the development of disruptive technologies, and with a changing workforce, how are we actually addressing the future and tomorrow? And I would offer you a couple of insights from the Air Force, from our Secretary and our Chief. A couple things that we have really focused on from a macro aspect in the Air Force is acquisition reform, based off of the new 804 authorities that we have been given. And the Secretary and the Chief have actually put these to really good use. Some of you may have been reading in various press reports about how Dr. Roper, our lead acquisition officer, has conducted pitch days, has done 50 for 50 contracts with our small businesses, and really kick-started how do we integrate and bring in industry with their ability in the future to work in a much closer construct with us. I would also offer, we have done some reorganization of our headquarters, and 3 significant areas that we have really concentrated on is, 1, we broke out our strategy, our 5, from our 8, which does more of our POM development, so that we actually have a team dedicated to looking at the future versus integrating them in with current ops or integrating them in with our POMing effort. Our second effort is AFCEA, which is really looking at how do we take concepts, work with industry, labs, and think tanks, and how do we take concepts and actually field at a much faster rate. And then the third area that we concentrate really is in my neck of the woods, and we took the A2 ISR and the A6 cyber operations and we combined them into one directorate. ISR and cyber affects operations. And so right now the Air Force has rebranded what the 6 means. The 6 means offensive, defensive, cyber operations, and warfighting comms, to include expeditionary, combat comms, and comm maintenance, all with ISR. This is a waypoint on our journey as we look to what we've seen the Army do and what we've seen the Navy do with regards to information warfare. And we are looking at integrating 2 NAFs, ISR and cyber, into an information warfare, warfighting, numbered Air Force, and we're expanding our information warfare definition to include ISR, cyber effects, warfighting comm, electronic warfare, as the Army did as well, and the Navy, information operations. So we're really in an element of change, and I would say I'll leave it there to unpack in some questions earlier. But one of the things I want to leave you with is we just didn't do this on our own. We studied how the Navy looked at N2, N6, Intel and Cyber, and we took some notes out of their book. And we looked at how the Army is going forward with electronic warfare and their modernization of their cross-functional team for Intel. And we tried to say, how does that apply and how do we integrate so that the services can talk a little bit better to each other?
Great, thank you. General Berrier.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here today to talk about Army priorities and Intel modernization. And Bob, thanks for having us. For the audience, it's a little daunting to have the former Army G2 sitting next to you, and I'm sure that no matter what I say, I'm going to be critiqued and AR'd after this. So
That's right.
yeah, so no sweat. So the Army is at a bit of an inflection point right now, and it's not a new inflection point for us. We were at a very similar place after the Vietnam War in the early 1970s, and that inflection point dealt with an Army that was pretty big, coming out of a coin-centric war in the Pacific, and had to sort of retool itself to be competitive against the Soviet Union. And so Army leaders at the time got together and thought through what the doctrine would be, and it was called air-land battle. And the big idea behind air-land battle was to be able to fight outnumbered and win. And the way we were going to do that was with better equipment. And air-land battle really gave birth to the Big Five. The M1 Abrams tank, the M2 Bradley fighting vehicle, some air defense systems, the Black Hawk and Apache helicopters, and some other things that we're cooking out there. And we actually used that to kind of win the Cold War. But as that happened, and we actually took those formations to combat in the Middle East, our adversaries and competitors were watching. They were watching our lethality, they were watching our precision, they were watching our ability to do deep fires with great success in a number of operations. And then 9/11 came along, and it changed our world. And for everybody sitting at this table, there was military service before 9/11 and then military service after 9/11. I think of my career in really 2 halves. And so what we had to do was retool our Army to be the best coin CT force in the world. And that CT force was enabled by precision targeting, and precision intelligence. And so our entire Army intelligence enterprise retooled to meet that demand. And as we continue to progress in the wars in coin and CT, and they wind down just a bit, although we're still engaged all over the world, there is a need to modernize our intelligence enterprise. So that inflection point has come around again, and we find that our assets and our resources are really kind of coin-focused and coin-centric, and we really need to modernize the Army intelligence enterprise. So to do this, the Army created Futures Command down in Austin, Texas, a new 4-star command. General Murray is the CG there, and it's the first new 4-star command we've had since TRADOC was formed in the 70s. They've developed cross-functional teams that deal specifically with modernization problems. You're probably familiar with what those are: soldier lethality, future vertical lift, long-range precision fires, the network and space, and so on. There is no ISR or Intel CFT. But what we do have is an ISR task force. And that ISR task force is led by the G2. And I have help from commanding generals at Fort Huachuca and the Intel Center of Excellence, as well as INSCOM, and with our PEO IEWS, Brigadier General Rob Collins. He's in this as well in the space level. And so from space, aerial, and terrestrial, we're taking a look at what we need to do to be competitive and to win in multi-domain operations. And multi-domain operations really fighting in all 5, ground, air, land, sea, cyber, and space, and the ability to compete and in conflict win quickly if we have to. And so everything that we're doing on the modernization front deals with near-peer adversaries, their capabilities, and how we can get inside their decision cycle quickly to win in conflict or win the competition space as well. So we'll unpack all of that as we get to the questions. And Bob, thanks again for having us.
Thank you. Admiral?
Thanks very much, General. It's an honor to be here as a junior officer among esteemed seniors in defense intelligence and have a chance to talk with you today as a representative for Vice Admiral Matt Kohler, who is the Director of Naval Intelligence. You've probably been tracking that all of us admirals have been told to take a few days of leave, uninterrupted leave, and make that part of our priorities. And Admiral Kohler just got done with the major wargaming cycle, and now he's getting his leave in. And he asked me to join you today to share his thoughts on a broad range of topics related to what the priorities have become for naval intelligence in the evolution of our naval strategy and our Chief of Naval Operations maritime design. And I'll begin by saying, if you're familiar with Navy information warfare, then you know that naval intelligence is part of Navy information warfare. I think General Jamieson did a great job of describing for us how we've oriented around a core concept of information and sustained sort of a set of leadership priorities without losing focus on the individual component priorities of the things that make up information warfare. If you're unfamiliar with that, in the United States Navy, information warfare is intelligence, signals intelligence or cryptology, oceanography and meteorology, to include hydrology, and our information technologies and information networking environments. Bound together around the core concept that those things have become fairly inseparable in both distributed maritime operations and the way we intend to operate with our joint partners and our allies. Those things now are under N2N6 on the Navy staff under Vice Admiral Matt Kohler. Were he to talk to you, he'd say he wears 4 hats. I can only tell you that I help him with 1 or 2. As the warfare integrator, I'm his principal programmer, and I'm glad to say that I'm in between palms right now, so I actually have a moment to think about things that might be relevant to the audience today. Some things I would share, though, to follow on General Berrier's comments with regard to 9/11. That had a profound effect upon the way the United States Navy operated as part of the Joint Force. And it changed the way we approach naval intelligence at sea. It focused our naval intelligence afloat principally on targeting and support of deep strike. As you're well aware, we operated in the 1980s and 1990s with the sense that we would be detached from the joint force, en route to a fight in a forward area, or asked to control the sea. And if you look back on the evolution of our maritime strategy around 2006, we became part of a more broadly defined joint and interoperable effort designed to be part of the extension of American and allied power deep into target areas. And that was not particularly different from the way we planned to fight, say, in support of the air-land battle concept in defense of Europe. But it did change the way we oriented our priorities. And at the same time, we had a massive investment in our relationship with special operations. And naval intelligence today in the United States Navy is characterized by a profound integrated approach to the things that you would sense were part of the priorities and continue to be priorities for the distribution of national power against insurgent or terrorist forces. But now we're faced with a different reality in that we have to recompensate and rebuild the resources for the maritime fight focused on our maritime needs, not apart from those things that are required as part of the joint and interoperable force, but those things that are particularly important to us at sea. If you think about maritime domain awareness, the ability to sense and understand the environment and those things in it, the fact that there are somewhere just south of 90,000 recognized ships on the seas of the world, and the vast surface of the earth that's covered by ungoverned space, bound loosely by international law. The environment we have to operate in is one filled with a lot of unknowns. And so naval intelligence is looking back in on itself as part of our information warfare implementation plan for great power competition. It's joining the rest of information warfare and trying to rebuild the previous strong analytic and expertise bases that we held in the maritime environment, not necessarily focused on the delivery of power ashore, but the ability to hold and sustain power at sea. And at that, sir, I'll turn it back over to you so we can get on with your questions.
Okay. Well, so against that backdrop, there's been a lot of discussion, as I mentioned earlier, about multi-domain operations. This increases the complexity. I mean, there's one thing to go from a joint force that was daunting enough for us, and you had to drag a lot of people into that, services into that. But now going multi-domain, what are your thoughts? Is this going to cause, what challenges does this cause for each of the services? And right now, we lost GIFCOM, we deactivated. We used to do a lot of experimentation down there. So each of the services are talking about multi-domain, but how do you see ISR support the multi-domain, and is that going to cause some challenges vis-a-vis types of people we need to recruit, types of people we need to retain? Do we need to reorganize it all, or what's the challenge? And then what's the role? The services are all talking about it, but where the commands fit in, and how do you see that unfolding? And I'll start off there. Scott, you want to talk about that?
Sure. A lot to unpack there. The first thing I would say is when I had about 2 days into the job, I went to see Dash, and she talked to me about her ISR flight plan and all the things that she was doing across her enterprise to improve that enterprise for her service. I did the same thing with the Navy N2. And so I think what the services are doing with JFCOM Gone is JFCOM Gone, we're collaborating a lot more than we probably ever have. And I think we're all friends, and that makes it really easy to collaborate. So whether we're talking about analysis or collection, sensing, AI, we're all in the same meetings, and that's really led by the USDI and his team doing a great job trying to corral us. But what I would say from an Army perspective, our solution to this inflection point that I talked earlier was the formation of Army Futures Command down in Austin. They put it in Austin so they could sort of be in the center of innovation and really creative thinking about how to get after some of these wicked and complex problems that multi-domain operations brings us. And so our motto in the ISR task force is by, with, and through Army Futures Command. And even though I don't work for General Murray, I certainly report to him at every step on what I'm doing with academia, industry, service partners, labs, and everything that we're doing sort of rides through Futures Command in the team there as well. And so whether it's talking to the network team, the future vertical lift team, what we're doing in the task force on the ground, in the aerial layer and in space goes through all of those cross-functional teams because they all have a piece of it. Whether it's the network or helicopters or the latest combat vehicle, they're going to have an element of something related to ISR in all of them. So I feel like we're very well postured with the services, USDI, the Joint Staff J7 is also involved, and we experiment together, we work together, we're moving out together.
General Jamieson.
I think that General Berrier did capture the inflection point and the history extremely well. I do want to just take a second and say the Air Force also went down that journey, and we have two rather large inflection points. For some of you who are as distinguished as I am in age, you might remember WW Storm, which was where the Air Force really brought out its precision weapons and stealth technology. And that was a huge change for the Air Force. And then fast forward to 9/11, where we were able then we had honed and developed our tactics, techniques, and procedures, not just from a warfighting standpoint, but from all that intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance had to do to support the employment of precision weapons. From a targeting perspective, from an indications and warning perspective, it was a huge change for us. And then if you look at how do we then take what we had and then assist and really be all in on the VEO fight was when we really took our capability for collection and collection management and developed our reach back distributed capability with our DGS enterprise that we also partnered with the Army and the Navy on. And I had to go down that path because it was very, at that time, and really for the next 15, 17 years, our reach back distributed capability has really been centered on a platform problem. So we launch a platform, will it be an RPA, an MQ-9, or an M1, or a Global Hawk, or we launch a U-2 or an RJ, and we had a team that did processing, exploitation, and dissemination for that line. We no longer do that. We have matured our distributed capability to a deployed in place capability where we now look at a problem-centric issue via a global theater. So we really do look at things a bit differently. And while we don't have cross-functional teams leading us, we actually do have a pilot program with our DGS capability that we kicked off in EUCOM to actually look at the problem that the EUCOM commander has identified as his #1 issue, and then how do we actually look at our cross-functional ISR team and integrate from national to tactical all of the assets required. So we're looking at sensing, identifying, attributing, and sharing that data all together from a strategic down to a tactical level. That's really one aspect. In order to do that, it does touch on a little bit of the experimentation that you highlighted, and I do want to unpack that just a little bit because we actually have 3 lines of effort that we have been working on for the past 3 to 4 years. We are doing experimentation, we are doing DevOps, and we are doing simulation and rehearsals. And each one of those has got their advantages, but for example, the experimentation, we're able to work in a joint environment to really tease out something that is more on the, could we field this at scale, and is it appropriate for this global issue we're all facing? Our developmental ops is more of our airmen sitting with coders, and some of you might have heard of Kessel Run, where we actually look at a specific issue, and we have airmen and coders working together to spirally develop things that we can actually field at scale. And then we look at simulation and rehearsals, and that's really where we're working with industry on, can we actually look at a virtual reality that can augment our training and augment how we dress rehearse for a plan or operation. And we've been doing that on our own, and at times with both the Army, the Navy, and the Marines to see how and where do we want to invest in. Because this all rests on the military, our DoD shift to truly a multi-cloud capability where we can access our data, transport our data, secure our data, and actually field at scale and relevance to meet what the field commander actually needs. And I will hold human capital because that is such a huge topic that all of us are wrestling with for a specific answer to a specific question, because the culture, the training, the recruiting, the retention is worthy of its own separate topic. I'll pass it to you.
Thank you, General.
Admiral Parode.
Thank you very much, General.
Any thoughts?
So it's easy, yeah, well, I have some. I don't know if they'll be original now. So say what my senpai said are all exactly right. The business of building a experimental environment for the future of maritime operations is serious work. And of course, naval intelligence and information warfare integrated in it. So let me begin by threading from the question I think General Noonan asked about, in the absence of Joint Forces Command, how's the Navy adapted and what have they done to improve the outcomes of their investment decisions in creating a joint force or a joint interoperable force that's useful in the maritime environment? Well, I begin by first saying that in the absence of Joint Forces Command, obviously we operate our platform-centric forces in joint environments persistently. Even when we're just operating, if you will, say in a force deployment role or in a force positioning role, it's done in consideration of global force requirements and joint command and control. The Navy, as a platform-centric force, is highly dependent upon space resources not owned and operated by the Navy. And our ability to command and control our forces over a great deal of distance, in both, if you think about laterally in a theater as well as in depth back to CONUS, require us to interactively engage with joint commanders on a daily, if not hourly basis. And I observed this recently personally out at in Naples, at the 6th Fleet Maritime Operations Center while the 6th Fleet Commander, Admiral Franchetti, was directing 2 carrier strike groups in the Mediterranean. And that's a generally rare event these days. What used to be a persistent force presence has evolved away from that theater, but at this time, there are a plethora of Navy ships and Navy aircraft working with joint and allied forces in the Mediterranean, and it was indeed a delicate dance to provide all of those sailors and all of their joint brothers and sisters in arms with the communications they required to operate both safely and effectively in the presence of both competitors and challenges. And what that described for me back in my day job was the need for us to focus a new set of investments on our maritime operations centers. And I won't plunge into that now because that's still a developmental effort, but there'll be more available to the media on how we intend to do that in the next several weeks. But it reminded us that the Navy's been honing the edge at our tactical force application platform-centric strike group level very well. And it's highly effective in apportioned joint operations. What we haven't done with the same persistence and global effectiveness is build our capability and capacity to plan and exercise force maneuver and fires from an operational level of war perspective. And so we're learning from our Army and Air Force counterparts their experience in doing that, very specifically in the CAOC experience has been provided a powerful set of priorities for us. But let me get back to experimentation very quickly. So we've had a renaissance in the Navy in warfare development commands. We've had investments in the centers in building tactical capacity and capability to train our forces in fires applications, and that includes ISR and targeting. But what we haven't done is knit that together at the maritime operations layer, and now Admiral Oscar Meyer at our Navy Warfare Development Command has taken over the reins from Admiral Hitchcock in leading that effort, in framing how we're going to experiment and exercise, experiment with new technologies and with new applications and exercise our forces. For us in information warfare, Admiral Jeff Scheit leads our Navy Information Warfare Development Command. It is a not subordinate to, but an important functional, focused command aimed at information warfare. And his primary priorities are focused on C5 ISR, so command, control, communications, computers, intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, and targeting. And there's a lot to do there, and a lot of work that needs to be done to take what we've learned to do at the unit of force level and build operational competency and capacity that's globally applicable and reconstitutable in crisis. To close on that, we find that it's very important for us to evolve the concept of our naval tactical grid. You've probably heard about the Fleet Tactical Grid. It emerged last year or late last year as a discussion about how we would do force management for distributed maritime operations. But it's evolved now to become the basis for a new naval integrating capabilities concept, which will flow from work that's being done right now in a DevOps environment, modeled after Kessel Run, and led by both OpNav and our Information Warfighting Enterprise, to be briefed back to the Chief of Naval Operations this autumn for his approval. When he approves that NIC, that Navy Integrated Capabilities concept, that will form top-level requirements for a whole host of new Navy capabilities and capacity from the tactical platform to the operational level of war for all the components of information warfare. And for some of those components related specifically to operations in space and cyberspace. So look forward to that. Thank you very much, sir.
Yeah, thank you very much. Let me go into a couple of what I'll call technical kinds of questions, and then we'll jump into readiness, trying to get to where General Jamieson was a few minutes ago talking about. But let me go to a lot of work, and usually at these forums, the big buzzwords are AI and ML. We have a panel next door talking about AI. Certainly Air Force has done a lot of work on AI, as have all the services. You guys satisfied with where we are right now, or what's next, or where are you going to focus your efforts? Without getting into anything classified, but just some thoughts on that without taking over the rest of the day. So let me start with Admiral. You had two questions. I know you were a last-minute replacement.
Oh.
You should be fine now.
I'm pretty good on this. So let me first say, I can speak to this with all the authority I'm not given, because the Chief of Naval Research is in charge of both AI and ML for the Navy. But let me get back to the business at hand, which is the integration of emerging technologies in information warfare. And I will tell you that developments in artificial intelligence and machine learning land squarely in this space. And why? Because this space is involved with massive amounts of both structured and unstructured data. Whether it's data about the maritime environment, as Admiral Ocon likes to say, from the seabed to space, or whether it's data about cyberspace, which is deep, broad, and structured until it's in relation to people, and then it becomes vastly unstructured, or whether it's about simply understanding the propagation of our electromagnetic maneuver warfare requirements in the maritime environment. All of these things, all of these concerns generate a vast amount of data. And so our principal priorities are focused still on getting machines working on behalf of our human expertise to plow through gigantic amounts of data. And as General Jamieson mentioned, as we move into full cloud enabling for both applications and storage, we're going to see a lot of opportunity to work with both the intelligence community and our sister services so that we don't reinvestigate and spend money on things that have either been proven to be too hard or proven to be very easy and are already in the service of others. So that's really what our focus is, sir, right now, principally on data. I will close by offering that one of the things we're exploring aggressively this year is how to more rapidly harvest human expertise and apply it to machine learning. And this do loop is actually really important. It's personally interesting to me because I worked on some projects at USDI many years ago now that were in support of Special Operations Command that described how fundamentally hard it is to really teach machines to do human work because the human brain is so much more vastly competent than even the most highly massively parallel processing system. And capturing the nuances of human experience and being able to boil those down to things that you can teach even the most impressive processors to do is no mean feat. I've seen it done, and obviously you have seen it done as well, but we have to find a way to do it in a more scalable and affordable fashion than having experts come to teach a machine how to carry out things in parallel. And so that's where we're at, sir.
So who's doing that for the Navy?
So Rear Admiral Dave Hahn, our Chief of Naval Research, is the principal officer in charge of AI and ML in the Navy, and I collaborate with him at the 2-star level for technology transfer. His expert is actually next door on the panel right now, Mr. Brett Vaughn, providing his perspective. And Brett used to work for me in our features team, so we have good interaction.
Thank you. General Jamieson.
Well, again, I would echo everything that my colleague said, and I'll take a little bit different tact because we are actually very closely partnered on everything that he talked about. And I'll give you a little bit more of a specific thought that we are trying to execute from both our ISR flight plan and we are in development of our cyber warfare flight plan. And what we're trying to put together is more of I would say it's more of a mesh network, multi-domain operational capability that is integrating not just sensors and platforms from what is traditionally our ISR enterprise, but we're including our EW and our cyber enterprise to give us what we call a collaborative sensing grid. And it kind of gets back to what General Berrier talked about in the beginning of the multi-domain. So we have assets for space, for air, for surface, for subsurface, for cyber. And we are trying to put that into a network that is resilient with the data being able to be shared, stored, accessed, and secured. And I'm deliberately saying these things because without a hybrid cloud capability, you really cannot operate artificial intelligence, machine learning, human-machine teaming at the speed and relevance or scale of relevance that is required for this great power competition we're in. Truth be told, in preparation for this forum, General Berrier and I had a quick Tamberg session. And he actually asked me, if there was something that kept you up at night, what would it be about AI or ML? And we kind of talked about that a little bit. And I said, I really think we have really focused on how do we get inside the adversary's decision cycle. And I think that is an extremely worthy endeavor for us to do. The only way that's going to do that is partnering with industry on a hybrid multi-cloud solution. And it can't just be one, it's got to be all. We all have to partner together. We have to invite in and ensure that academia is part of this so that we get future thoughts, because we've got to look at, as we're doing this, are hypersonics taking off? Is quantum taking off? Is something else taking off? So as we look at, I would say, disruptive technologies, not just artificial intelligence, do we actually have good partnerships with industry and academia and think tanks so that we actually are looking at all of these areas, integrating and discussing them, and that the services are talking to each other so that we're not all focused in on just one area. And with that, I'll turn it over to Scotty, who I know heard probably a different answer when we talked about our VTC.
Slightly, yeah.
But there you have it.
The Army's answer to this, well, Bob, you asked, are we satisfied? I would say we're not satisfied. There are a lot of AI efforts going on out there and a lot of activities. Activity doesn't always generate results, though, and for us, AI is about lethality. And so if you can shoot something 1,000 miles, if you can target something at 1,000 miles, you want the AI to really take people out of the loop for you. And really have an instantaneous link from sensor to shooter so that you can target quickly. In a multi-domain operation, we need to disintegrate the enemy's ability to attain standoff. The only way you're going to do that is with advanced analytics, AI, machine learning. So for the Army, we have an AI task force. It's led by a data scientist who is Brigadier General, works for CIO G6, and we're putting skin in the game on that with a lot of research and a lot of thinking on that. From an intel perspective in our foundation layer with D6A, we're writing that requirement into what we call capability drop 2. So if you think about the D6 backbone right now in all of our theater MI brigades, we have server farms and brains, and they basically ingest theater level intel data, national, wherever it comes from. We believe that as the cloud comes and as USDI and the DNI help us with that, as the services move forward with the cloud, we'll be able to reduce all those brains down to a brain in the Pacific, a brain in CONUS, and a brain in Europe, and that would be a cloud-ready, AI-infused kind of capability. And so as we migrate this capability, and we operate in denied DIL environment where we're out of communications, we have to have edge nodes. The software has to be there to enable that, and so as we work towards a CD2 solution, what we know of the D6 platform today is basically going to migrate into a command post computing environment and a series of applications, and those applications will have to be infused with AI if we're going to get after the lethality piece of this. And then the last thing I'll say is our capability drop 1 solution for D6 will do automated terrain analysis. So think if you're a support battalion or transportation battalion S2 doing a modified combined obstacle overlay or a terrain analysis to give you the right route in a combat environment instantaneously, happens in seconds, not minutes. It's a pretty powerful tool. What if you had a cloud-ready solution where you could take that terrain analysis and reach into the cloud and grab what I would call the onion skin of order of battle for an adversary unit and overlay that order of battle on the terrain that's already been analyzed in an offense or a defensive formation, and with the machine learning and AI, be able to portray that unit on the terrain that's already been analyzed. It's a powerful tool and a powerful concept, and that's where we're going with CD2 and as we move the DSIGs forward to what we call mission command intelligence, where that happens in a very rapid, iterative basis to allow for wargaming and planning at the unit level. Bob, sorry. No,
great thoughts here. So one of the issues with cloud, and you know, we've heard this through service intel days, you go to the IC, you talk to each agency, lots of competing ideas. There's clouds, there's single cloud, multiple clouds, and I don't want to get into the whole acquisition around that, hybrid clouds and all this. There's a command and control network that exists out there in each of the services, and how does that patch into the IC network that's out there? And the Army's using D6, each of the services has systems, but it's tough because we're going to fight wars down the tactical level. at the secret level. Probably you're not going to have TS whatever down there. It's just too hard to do in many cases. Ideas on how you solve that problem, or what are the services doing on that? I mean, I was laughing at the Admiral. You have space to seabed. When I grew up we were trying to build architecture space to mud. So I think the services are intact on that, and I've been in sync on that. So ideas on how to integrate and I don't know if it's clouds or what's the solution set from command and control systems and IC, different clearance levels, and how we're going to do that.
So the reason I talked about cloud in the beginning is because we're nothing without an integrated architecture. And while we talk about AI and we talk about apps, that's kind of the sprinkling on top. You actually have to have the dedicated architecture to run this. So that's why we're talking about a hybrid cloud. So it isn't just cornered by one, where you have a 20-year contract, and I'm not citing anything other than how we've done business in the past, where one industry then owns your architecture, and you do 5-year, 6-year, my service, 10-year updates to that architecture. We got to get out of that paradigm. If we have a new capability with a fully hybrid cloud architecture, you can then add in your command and control. I do take issue. The Air Force is planning, investing, palming, and has integrated. We have fighting on JWICs. We are not thinking that we're going to fight only at the collateral level, because as we look at the capabilities that our adversaries have, there are more and more and more specially compartmented capabilities. There are more, there's more information at a much higher level that we believe the tactical element needs to be informed, aware of, so that they understand the entire environment. So for the past 4 years, we have been investing on what we call fighting on JWICs to integrate our planning at the TS level and above, all with our execution at that level.
And I'll follow up, if it's all right, just by saying that we've named a program manager this year to extend the top secret environment to the tactical level for the United States Navy. Candidly, it's not just an environment for intelligence anymore. I spent 2 years out at Offutt Air Force Base as the Director of Intelligence for United States Strategic Command, and rarely had any discussions of merit at the secret level, not even to the force level, because the business of that work is not at the secret level. And the Navy has come to recognize that, as General Jamieson rightly put, the emergence of competitive threats and the need to be able to fully inform our tactical commanders is demanding that we evolve concepts like zero trust architectures and multi-level security to support that need. And when we talk about this among our Navy leaders, we confront the reality that we as a nation in global peer competitive environment, a great power competition, may not wish to have to boil critical decisions down to the secret level in order to make them. And the machines that are going to function ever more increasingly in the unmanned platform environment won't know secret from top secret when they get the information they need to act on, but their effects may be profound and deep in the course of battle. And so we're really digging into this deeply. And I don't want to overemphasize, Navy's not trying to build its own JWICs. The Navy is trying to extend the top secret environment to the people that need it all the way to the tactical level. And I'll just...
I think the Army's thinking about it slightly differently. We have this thing called the Mission Partner Environment, the MPE. We believe that we're going to go to war with friends and allies, and that we're going to be able to extend, or going to have to extend our network to them. And if you think about classified data in a tactical or combat environment, the location of the adversary's fire CP is probably not classified. What is classified is how we know that information. And so if you have cloud technology that can strip out where that information came from, you can pass that relatively quickly to your partner. So as we go forward, we recognize the need for JWICs and that top secret level, but also the need to get information to our partners. And I'm not talking just Five Eyes partners. I'm talking those non-traditional partners that we don't envision we'll have a relationship with now, but someday in the future we might. And it'll be really important to do that. And so as we go forward, the emphasis is on mission partner environment, getting it down to the lowest classification level so we can share it quickly and instantaneously, and not have a man or woman in the loop of all of that.
Yeah, I just think for the Marines and Army, trying to get TSSI into an infantry company or battalion is very hard.
Very tough.
It's very tough. But I certainly appreciate it. Let me talk a little bit. I'm going to take comments, the 3 or 4 comments from the audience about General Vattel's comments this morning about allied partnerships. And there's a lot of joint experience here in the room. So ideas on that, and how are we doing on creating those partnerships? And we've seen in the Pacific, we just saw now every now and then this happens. The Japanese and South Koreans are arguing with each other. That they'll kumbaya eventually, but hopefully. How are you seeing that? And I know this gets a little delicate because of but do you want to comment on criticality? Yeah.
So if General Vattel said it was critical,
awesome.
We think it's awesome and critical. But I didn't hear his remarks, but I can imagine what he said.
Yeah.
The Army has gone down the road of this notion of an SFAB, a Security Force Assistance Brigade. We think that this is so important that we created 5 or 6 of these units in the process of standing them up. Basically a cadre, think of the Vietnam model where we went in to a particular sector and fell in on a large formation advice. So think of a battalion commander would be advising a friendly division commander kind of construct. We've kitted them out with the right stuff to maintain contact with the mothership. We've given them all the tools that they need to be successful. We think that these kinds of formations going into places where we normally haven't been and working with partners and allies is the way to go, and we think that that's going to forge the future with some of these countries.
I would agree. We also have air advisors taking a page out of the Army's notebook, and we actually train multiple nations flying in the United States to set up long-lasting relationships. One of the things that is actually an advantage for the both of us when we look at aviation is English is the aviation language around the globe, so it lends it a little bit easier for us to have better relations in developing our tactics, techniques, and procedures in the air environment. And I would say from a space environment, where we have worked very closely with our partners, we've got a Schriever war game ongoing right now that is actually not just U.S. Air Force, Army and Navy assets in there playing the war game. It's actually got coalition and partners for a space war game right now. So a lot of integration with our allies and partners. And I think that General Berrier really hit it. We all can count on our Five Eye partners, and we've got long-standing agreements, working relationships. I, in fact, on my staff, actually have some embeds from our Five Eye partners on my team. But we actually have to look at how are we going to deal with those coalition partners that are not our partners today, but perhaps will be tomorrow. And so how are we laying out, how are we going to share, not just our data, but really our execution elements that we hold dear. And we are working through that by looking at our training opportunities when we start. Down at Goodfellow Air Force Base, where our Intel school is, we actually have several different countries represented with training courses to establish them on our techniques on how we conduct analysis and how we conduct targeting development and targeting capabilities, so that we are sharing how we do things to show that we're not just interested in a transactional partnership where we hand them an answer, but we're actually interested in a long-term relationship where we actually understand the process, the techniques, and how to actually work through problem solving together.
Thank you, ma'am. The priority for partnership for the United States Navy is always high. In fact, it's written into the design and to our maritime strategy, as well as into our implementing instructions for information warfare. The focus right now is in creating the mission partner environment so that we can do exactly what General Berrier described, which is share the information that the partners need in order to improve their lethality and their understanding of the battle space without risking information about other things they don't need. And that comes when you establish trust and cooperative deployments, as we do with our allies in the Pacific, work closely with NATO as we have for 60 years, and we actually have standing command and control instructions with NATO that have stood the test of time, and we rely on them today. We are seeing the opportunities in the cloud, and we are very closely following the Air Force leadership in building the mission partner environment and are contributing both expertise and funding to getting to the place where we want to be, which is a joint and fully partnered interoperable environment where we get the right data, the right people at the right time. I think, I happened to come in at the end of General Vitel's statement, but he said what we all know, which is our ability to form and sustain partnerships is a tremendous strength of the American Joint Interoperable Force. And the trust that we build and sustain with our partnerships, in those partnerships, is the hallmark of our ability to sustain collective security where it needs to be sustained, and to reassure the world that peace is important to everyone.
Great. Let's talk about readiness, because we've got, we heard this morning, and I'm sorry you missed it, but talking about Russia, China, there's still Iran, there's still North Korea, there's people we haven't even identified yet, because this is what always happens to us, right? We get into a gunfight with somebody that we never even thought of. So some questions we're getting: how are we adjusting that? How are we doing recruiting, retaining? Are there things that industry can do or academia could do to help us with education on cyber defense, multi-domain operations? I haven't asked about, but as we now have to introduce, each of you are going to have to provide people for space. How is that going to work out? What are your readiness challenges now? And are there ways that this collective body here can help you with that?
Okay, I'll take a stab at that one right off the bat, because this is actually near and dear to our hearts, whether we're talking ISR or we're talking cyber effects operations. And I say that because our secretary and our chief of staff have got our three really key themes that we're working on, is bolstering lethality and readiness and strengthening with our allies and partners. So I'll take a look at just really our readiness. And if we look at things from a traditional intelligence perspective, they're very similar for the cyber perspective. And what do I mean by that? The way the Air Force looks at readiness, there's two different components. There is, first I have to generate and sustain that generation, and then I have to be ready for something. In our construct, the three really looks at what am I going to generate, i.e., it's been easy if it's an aircraft, because you can get through that scenario pretty quickly with maintenance, fuel, flight plan, and takeoff and go. And then we really have partnered on ready for what, because that's really where the adversary comes in and has a vote and gives us what are we actually being ready for. And one of the things that we have identified is we did really a deep dive about 4 years ago on how do we actually get some analytics and a framework on ready for what. And as every one of us does, we go to our really smart captains, lieutenants, tech sergeants, staff sergeants, and we say, here's the issue. Here's what we've got. We've got to figure out an automated process that can then adapt to a database so that we can human-machine team and use some machine learning and artificial intelligence to expand ready for what. So it's not all Excel spreadsheets in somebody's opinion. And we put this team together about 4 years ago, and they came up with what we call the Red Threat Matrix. Sounds pretty simple, right? Really what it does is it takes adversary capabilities, intent, demonstrated tactics, techniques, and procedures. It takes our ranges, and it looks at what do we have on our ranges, virtual, simulated, and constructive. And it automates, here is the replication of the threat, their TTPs, here's the equipment, both physical and virtual that we're in, and then here is what it takes to achieve these elements to go after a VEO or great power competition or somewhere in between, which would probably be Iran or North Korea. And we've got all of that laid out. And we've taken that to Kessel Run to do that automation so that we can create a database and then put some AI on top, as I say, because we will have built the architecture and we're looking at sharing that with all of our sister services. Because if we look at readiness and we don't know what are we getting ready for, we have an issue with our reporting, because then it's very subjective. So we're really trying to look at how do I quantify what we're really getting ready for. And then I'll circle back for, it's kind of been an issue for ISR and for cyber because not necessarily a platform to generate. If I look at collection platforms, it's easy. If I look at some of the cyber platforms that Cybercom is using, I've got it. But if I'm looking at my analytic portion of ISR or my targeting aspect for ISR, what are those metrics for generating and how do I need to look at it? And if I'm looking at my serviced retained cyber capability, or I'm looking at my defensive cyber of my power projection systems, what am I generating to get those same metrics? So we would welcome some assistance on that, because I can then generate what am I getting ready for.
Well, I'll offer, and I think General Jamieson covered from my perspective of the waterfront a huge number of concerns the Navy shares with our service partners. Some things I'll add, though, because General Noonan asked specifically what can industry and academia help with. I'll be straightforward and blunt. The human-machine interface is something we need help on. When I go home after a nice 150-minute commute back from the Pentagon to my house in Maryland in the evening, and I fire up the PS4 and I load a new game that I haven't played yet, I don't need much time to learn how to play it. Why is that? Is it just because it's entertainment, or is that human-machine interface been tuned so that I enjoy my experience with that PS4? Because that's what it's for entertainment. We need to build the human-machine interface for our analysis to be functioning at the same level, to captivate the analysts, to enable them to do their job better, not to force them through a series of serial or rudimentary routines that have left over from a machine that the basis for that processing was created 15 or 17 years ago, or 22 years ago. And that's not meant to be a terrible criticism. We bring it on ourselves. So one of the things we've gone back into the Navy process to ask ourselves, and this is not in the N2N6, but in the N9 in the Digital Warfare Office, is how do we better write requirements to improve the way the human interfaces with the machine in a way that doesn't create a training burden? Because what we've done so far is to patch that up with more training. And there's nothing more frustrating than a young sailor who wants to get to work than for her to come to school to learn how to use the basic equipment of her job and then be sent for another 16 weeks of training in order to learn how to use the basic equipment of her job to do one more thing. And I think all of you can understand that frustration. Similarly, I'd offer that to academia. If there are folks from academia here, we're totally interested in what you're learning about the way the new generations of Americans are approaching their learning experience. We want to know that right up front. Now, that perspective will be inside a different part of the Navy staff, but we'll be joined at the hip on the discussion because the impact on us is grave. We are dealing with, in our world of information warfare, a workforce, the pressure upon that workforce to be technically apt, if not superior, is huge. And yet they come out of systems that don't generate necessarily a focus on technology. It's not meant to criticize the system or the experience of the student, but we as a service want to minimize the shock and maximize the value of that young sailor's exposure to new opportunity. And we're going to need the help of both the academics who are understanding and evolving education in the United States and the technologists who are improving the way people relate to machines to help us bridge the gaps. And finally, I would offer this. There is a vast diversity in American experience that we're not necessarily very good at tapping. We're not good at bringing that diversity into our force and applying it well, because there's still a lot about the military that's a very uniform, structured, industrial approach to force development and presentation. Now, we're looking at how to do that better, but we're taking halting steps right now because we're still trying to orient how we're going to bring our forces to bear on that. And I think our current Vice Chief of Naval Operations, Admiral Burke, when he was Chief of Naval Personnel over the last year, has released to public eye a huge number of application layer interfaces for our personnel that are designed to put our people more in touch with technology and take away from them some of the fear of what their career looks like and the unknown decisions they have to make 4, 6, or 8 years down the line. I want to expand on that and purpose those same applications for the way our people relate to the information environment of the future fight. Thank you.
Great.
Just going to add a quick comment, and it really deals with the people aspect of this business. And what I say is every patriot a recruiter. So what I would like all of you to do is to identify some young American that looks like they're happy with a good personality that wants to come in the military, hopefully the Army, and try to recruit them and have them go see a recruiter. Seriously, there are 400,000 young Americans a year that are eligible just out of high school to be in the military. And guess what? We are all competing for them, as well as many other organizations and schools competing for them. So recruiting is a tough problem and requires emphasis. CSA 40, General McConville just replaced General Milley. You may know General Milley is going to fleet up to replace General Dunford soon. His priorities are readiness, modernization, reform, and then soldiers, people. And so he's putting a lot of focus and effort into our recruiting operation, how we do that, how we get the best for the most. So every patriot a recruiter. And then for academia and for industry, our partners here, I would say it's no secret that our adversaries have focused on our technologies over the last 20 years and they've been stealing us blind. So I would say do what you can to protect your information. Do what you can to protect it from those who want to steal it. And make our military better by just protecting and thinking that through when you partner with us on programs. Thanks.
Hear, hear.
Great. We only have a couple minutes left, so let me throw out a question that was asked by the audience here. What book are you reading? Or what book do you recommend?
This is an easy one for me. I'm reading The 100-Year Marathon, and it is fantastic. If you want to understand a perspective of China and great power competition, I highly recommend you read that book. It is from a primary source, and it is extremely interesting and telling.
So I am in the middle of the first book by Will Durant about the history of civilization. So I'm on a journey to get through all 9 or 11 volumes. I can't remember which, but it's telling and it's certainly recreational. But that's what I'm doing right now.
Yeah. Admiral?
We've got 3 books in the juggling act right now. One's called Gold Diggers. It's about the experiences, the Yukon Gold Rush from the perspective of several different slices of Americans and others who went up to dig gold. I'm finishing Taming of the Samurai by a Yale professor. It describes the development of the culture of honor in the Tokugawa shogunate and how it evolved into the development of the modern Japanese state in Meiji. And then Taming of the Samurai. And then the 3rd book I'm reading is called St. Petersburg. It's a spectacular deep dive into the development of the western capital of Russia.
You still reading DC Marvel comics, Scott?
I'm not, but I don't want to offend anyone.
Yeah,
I'm reading more
counsel.
manga right now than I'm reading Marvel, so.
Clearly, somebody who's extremely talented reading 3 at one time. I do have the Ruth Bader Ginsburg book
Oh, that's a
teed
good
up
book.
for when I finish the one I'm reading, because I'm not quite that human-machine team. Thank you so much.
All right, I want to thank the panel, and I want to thank people that asked questions. I again congratulate General Jamieson, just an absolutely superb career, and look forward to seeing you in more of these. Don't be a stranger to AFCEA INSA. General Berrier, Admiral Parode, thanks so much for coming out here. You guys have been great, unbelievable. Thanks a lot.